vetoes them. The U.S. is far ahead of anyone else since the 1960s in vetoing Security Council resolutions. Britain's second, nobody's within shouting distance. That brings up another point. If Iraq had the veto, how many UN resolutions would it be violating? Well, obvious answer, none. That means if any discussion of violation of Security Council resolutions even pretends to be serious, it's going to bring in the veto. Otherwise, it doesn't even pretend to be serious. You can ask yourself how often this has been brought up in the discussion of passionate discussions of Iraq's only partial compliance with a series of UN security resolutions, council resolutions. And the resolutions that the U.S. has vetoed, and remember, it's far in the lead, nobody's close except Britain, are very serious ones. It includes, for example, several resolutions calling on all states to observe international law, which the United States vetoed with Britain abstaining. It includes resolutions calling on the United States to observe the rulings of the World Court, the International Court of Justice, which condemned the United States for unlawful use of force. That means international terrorism in its war against Nicaragua, which Blaise mentioned. The U.S. simply disregarded it, vetoed the Security Council resolution, and a long series of others on a wide range of issues. These are not trivial matters, and it's not ancient history either. In fact, it's the very same administration which is in office right now. They're almost identical to the ones who ran the country in the Reagan-Bush administrations. These are serious issues, and the people in the region are well aware of it. They are also well aware that however much they may despise Saddam Hussein, he's not a threat. It's the weakest country in the region and far from the most serious violator of Security Council resolutions. This ought to be, everybody ought to know this. This ought to be the front pages of independent media, if there were any. These are close to truisms. There's nothing obscure about these things. It's the kind of things you ought to learn about in high school, but you certainly ought to think about and find out about. They're important to know. Well, Saddam Hussein is undoubtedly hated and despised in the region, but by now George Bush has accomplished a miracle. He's not only organized an international peace movement, as Blaise said, he's turned Saddam Hussein into a figure who is revered in the region. It's gotten to the point where the mainstream press is concerned about it. Been major articles in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and others in the last couple of days saying that the ones we're claiming to be liberating the Arab and Muslim worlds are in a total fury about this. There's a wave of revulsion against the U.S. war, which has extended the fear and hatred of the administration in Washington well beyond what it was before, and have even turned Saddam Hussein into a figure of reverence. I mean, they hate him. They know he's a thug and a despot and a killer, but at least he's standing up to the savage Americans, and he's the only one who's doing it. And you can read in the mainstream press here that he's described with reverence by people in all walks of life in countries like Jordan, the closest ally of the United States, and by people right in the mainstream, Christian, wealthy Christian Arabs who say, okay, America is our enemy, we have to destroy them. The head of the Strategic Studies Center in Jordan, very pro-American, was quoted recently, just a couple days ago, as saying that there is no doubt that in the Arab world, Saddam Hussein holds the high ground. And he was worried about that because he knows what it means for countries like Jordan and Egypt and others. If they ever relax controls, if they ever allow the voice of the people to be heard, it's going to be the voice of radical Islamists who want to declare global war against the United States and secular nationalists who are very much into the whole U.S. International economic system, but agree with them. I agree with them that something must be done to stop this savage power, which here we can turn to actual polls. There have been recent polls of the Arab world conducted by specialists at U.S. universities, which show that about 95% of the population from Morocco to through the Persian Gulf to Lebanon believes that the United States has no interest in the Arab world other than controlling its oil, protecting its offshore military base, Israel, and humiliating Arabs and Muslims. Doing that by virtue of the fact that it possesses the force, the means of violence that enable it to do anything it wants, to murder people from a safe distance, to kick them in the face, anything. That doesn't make friends. The Washington Post article about this a couple of days ago opens by saying things are brewing in the Arab world which do not bode well for the United States. That's quite true, that Bush is acting to create the basis for a reaction which is likely to be a reaction of expanded terrorism. They know they're not going to attack the United States. They can't do that. But they can do what international affairs specialists have been pointing out for a long time. They can develop weapons of mass destruction. They can carry out extensive terrorist acts, which are basically unstoppable. And that's exactly the consequences of the actions that are being taken, quite apart from what's happening to Iraqis and Palestinians and others, which they see, even though they're suppressed here. I mean, if somebody was watching this from outer space, they could be forgiven for believing that George Bush was embedded into the White House, to use a contemporary term, as an agent of Osama bin Laden. I mean, if Osama is... It's not a joke. I mean, if Osama's alive, he must be enjoying this mightily. You know, it's fulfilling his wildest dreams. It's creating a war between the evil empire and billions of people around the world who are terrified of it and want to destroy it. Well, you know, how did we get to this point? It was bad enough. It goes back quite a ways, but let's just take too much time. Just take the very recent past. Let's begin with last September. A lot of things happened last September. One thing that happened last September is that the Bush administration released its national security strategy. That was an extremely important document. It sent shudders around the world, and in fact right through the U.S. foreign policy establishment. Like the next issue of Foreign Affairs, the main establishment journal, had a pretty harsh critique of it. What did it say? Well, it was very brazen. The national security strategy said that the U.S. the U.S. government is intending to rule the world by force. That's the dimension in which the U.S. has overwhelming advantages. By now it probably outspends the rest of the world combined in military force and is expanding it in directions that are considered extraordinarily dangerous by everyone, like moving into weaponry in outer space. It's not dominant in other dimensions, but in force, yes, overwhelmingly dominant. The U.S. intends to rule the world by force and to do it permanently. Any potential challenge that is detected to U.S. dominance will be destroyed. That's the content of the national security strategy. There's been nothing like that in history. Nobody's ever said that. They may think it, or they may describe policy that way, in fact have, but it's never been declared as official government policy before. There are precedents, and they're worth looking at, but nothing quite like this. That frightened people, increased the fear that already existed. The fear was already great, increased it greatly.